Hi friends, welcome to our Monday Satsang Living Yoga, Reflections on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's take a moment to center ourselves and begin together with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you now. Friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda. With hearts open and deep gratitude, we call to the grace of the divine to guide us in our time together. Help us to dive deeply into these teachings, the gifts of the autobiography of a yogi, and apply them in a meaningful way to our journey of awakening. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, dear souls, so we were talking last time, we've been spending a lot of time in the Master's ashram, and I was reflecting on, kind of building upon what we talked about last week, the blessing of being in an ashram setting. So I was talking about, as it says in the autobiography, Yogananda, it's a large chapter, very deep and rich, with his many experiences with Sri Yukteswar, and so many treasures that we can pull out from that chapter. And as I was saying last week, I found myself just noticing this, these various, examples of ashram life. So we have from the autobiography of a yogi, the ashram life, Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda. And then in Swami Kriyananda's The New Path, he describes that's his autobiography, his journey of awakening, how his search for truth, the many places he looked, and eventually finding Yogananda, reading this book, which transformed his life and set him on a course of discipleship to Yogananda. He tells the story, he's told it many times. If you haven't heard it, it never gets old. It's this beautiful experience of him reading the autobiography. I'll say this about it first, because this is also meaningful. He opened the autobiography, and in the very beginning of the book, it says, dedicated to the memory of Luther Burbank, an American saint. Luther Burbank lived in Northern California in Sonoma County, and there is many historical sites now, many places are named after him. Yogananda met him and visited him many times and declared him as a saint. His consciousness, the consciousness of Luther Burbank, his ability to work with plants, to tune into their consciousness and their potential, and to work with them in a loving way. He created many grafts of different kinds of plants. He did experimental orchards, and has amazing gardens. So more than way ahead of his time, he was tapping into a higher level of consciousness. Well, when Swami read that this book was dedicated to an American saint, he thought, forget it. There are no American saints. So he closed the book and put it back on the shelf and left. But later, he came back. I think it might have just been the very next day, I'm not sure. So he came back and tried again. And this time, when he came back, the vibration, the power of this book, I would say for certain, the power of his guru, spoke to his heart and spoke to him. He tells this beautiful story of it. Again, I recommend, you could probably just find it on YouTube, or he's told this story many times. But what happened for him is that he began to recognize, not on a conscious level, but on an energetic level, that this book had an answer for him. There was something he needed in this book. It was right for him. He went home and read the book cover to cover and was moved to tears and laughter. He was so profoundly inspired that he actually jumped on a bus after finishing the book, and he was on the East Coast. He traveled across the country. I think it took him 3 days to get to California. Yogananda's ashram was in Southern California, and he went there and asked to meet him. So, and again, a beautiful, inspiring story about that. Well, then in the path, the new path, Swami tells about his experiences meeting Yogananda. He tells this story in the path, and his life there with him. He lived with Yogananda the last 3 years of Yogananda's life, and had, deep, powerful, inspiring experiences. I was mentioning last week that some of them very, very ordinary. The way that Swami related to Yogananda, and this feels an important point to touch upon, because when we're in environments and with people who can offer us guidance and support, and access to our own highest self, helping us tune into our own inner wisdom, how we relate, how we work with the environment, with the person, makes all the difference. So for Swamiji, one of the things that he did was he recognized that Yogananda was a guru. He recognized his spiritual stature, and he related to him appropriate to that. So what I mean by that is everything that Yogananda did and said, Swamiji took as a teaching, as an opportunity to learn something. I was recently listening to a talk with Jyotish and Devi. They're the spiritual directors of Ananda worldwide. And Devi said they were walking with Swamiji. This was a number of years ago now. And suddenly, in their walking together, Swamiji stopped and said, "Oh, that's what he meant." And he had this, Devi said, this very deep inward expression and kind of stance. And they didn't ask him about it, right? He was absorbed in thought, and obviously it was an inner understanding, an inner realization. Later, after the walk, Swami mentioned to them that 50 years previously, Yogananda had said something to him, and on their walk, it became clear what he meant. And for both Jyotish and Devi, they had this realization of a supreme example of discipleship, of receptivity. That for Swamiji, he was always in conversation, in relationship with Yogananda. Shortly before Yogananda's passing, one of his disciples asked him, they called him Master, "Master, after you're gone, will you still be near to us? Will you still be with us in the same way that you are now?" And what he said is, "To those who think me near, I will be near." And there's two aspects to that nearness. One, Asha was talking recently about, is that we believe in it. So if we believe that the Master is living in an eternal consciousness, so the body dies, but we don't die. The body dies, but the vibration and consciousness of a Master, which is fully awake, is untouched by physical death. So if we have that belief, if we think him near, he will be near. And if we call to him, if we reach out to him in our thoughts, in our reflections, if we take the experiences that we have of the divine and we stay in dialogue and conversation and reflection with those experiences, they can continue to teach us. And that's a very powerful example of working with divine blessings. So one divine blessing, it is to live in a spiritual environment. There is something I was mentioning this last week, I continue to be amazed by that power. I'm trying to find other words for it, but because it's so subtle. So I was saying this last week that with one of my good friends who's in discernment about, is this the right choice for their life? And it really does take discernment. It might seem obvious, but it's been my experience that I suppose in some cases it is. But I've absolutely seen for others, it isn't obvious. And for some, actually, they'll live near the community. That feels better. Sometimes you need a family home, or you just, there's different reasons, and it's all what's authentic and sincere for your journey, which is very, very important. Let me take a sip of water here. So the subtlety of the spiritual environment and the subtlety of spiritual power, I would say, it's my experience that, in fact, there's a quote from the Bible that says, "Be still and know that I am God." In one of our yoga affirmations, we say, "In stillness, I touch my inner strength." And this understanding that the divine is found in that inner quietude, in that inner stillness, in that place of open-hearted receptivity. So these are the qualities that help us to draw forth the spiritual power that's always coming our way. I can't remember if I've mentioned this in these talks or not, but it's coming to mind now that one of the things Yogananda taught is that in the equation of spiritual awakening, I think I may have mentioned it, but it's worth repeating. If you imagine 100% is required for awakening, 25% of that equation is the effort that we put into our spiritual life and to our journey of waking up, what we do to find and awaken to our own true self. So 25% of the equation. Now it feels like Yogananda and Swami Kriyananda pointed out, it feels like 100%. So you don't approach it with, oh, I only need to do a little. You actually do everything you can. But in the equation of things, it's 25% our effort, 25% the Guru's grace flowing to you, and 50% divine grace, God's grace flowing to you. So 75% of the equation is divine energy and grace flowing to us. We do all that we can, and really the bigger part is done by divine grace. We tune into it. We turn the channel. Yogananda used to talk a lot about not only vibration, that's part of the yoga teaching, but he used radios and TV examples, sound waves, to say that literally consciousness is on a vibrational energy level. And what we do in our effort is tune the channel to feel that vibration, to be in tune. And once we are, we're able to then draw the grace that's coming our way all the time. And he described it as, and I heard Swami give a talk about this one time where he said, when you're tuning a channel on a radio, I don't know how much people do that anymore, but there, you'll hear static. First you won't hear anything, and then you'll hear static. And then then you'll start to hear the sound, and you keep going, and finally the channel is clear. So it's like that with our spiritual life. We're tuning in, and the way that our consciousness begins to change illuminates for us that attunement. And the way that I practice that kind of on a daily basis is Yogananda taught that there are 8 manifestations in the physical world of God consciousness, divine consciousness, that we can experience tangibly. So I'll count those out. That's joy, peace, calmness, love, light, wisdom, sound, so that would be Om, and power, divine power. So any one of those 8 qualities of the divine are a way to check in with your own attunement. And again, subtly noticing, quieting yourself to see, is there an increase of any of those? Sometimes peace can be something that we touch first, that we feel first. Other times, it is a sense of joy, expanded joy. If you feel a sense of optimism or hopefulness that comes along with that. Calmness. Swami said that when we are receiving divine guidance, the three characteristics of that, one of them is calmness. The other 2 are clarity and joy. So if you have any one of those 3, when you feel guided in a particular way, it's an indication that it is intuitive guidance. If you don't feel those, then it's an indication that more likely it's the conscious mind, not a super conscious thought. I mean, it may be a fine thought, but it's not necessarily an intuitive divine guidance. So this idea that Swami, that we have in autobiography of Yogananda living with Sri Yukteswar and relating to him and relating to his experience as a disciple does. And that is a relationship. As I said, I'll just kind of think of different qualities to share from my observation of Swami Kriyananda, Asha, Shanti, other spiritual friends, and my own journey. Like what do I notice is, what does discipleship look like? How do I practice that? And I first and foremost hold it as a practice. So what that means for me is that it is something I'm cultivating rather than assuming is in place. One of the practices of discipleship is taking a vow of discipleship, deciding this path, whatever path that might be for you, in this case, the path of self-realization with Ananda, if it feels like your path, you can commit to that. If these gurus, if Yogananda feels like your guru, then you can choose consciously a beautiful ceremony. It can be done all by yourself, or it can be done with a spiritual friend or a minister, where you make that choice, and it comes from within you. I remember I had a yoga student who absolutely loved everything about these teachings. She just was so completely inspired by them. She was a private student. I was a fairly new teacher at the time, and absolutely was this blessing that she came into my life. And she said to me when I first met her the first day, I want to study yoga. I believe you're my teacher, and I want to know everything you know. I said, okay then. And the first thing I said is, well, we should study Raja Yoga, the text, together, because that's the heart of it. That's the art and science of Raja Yoga. Speaking of which, the course is starting up this week. So since I'm mentioning it, I'll just mention you can sign up for that if you're interested. We're doing the course virtually. I'll be teaching many of the yoga postures for the class and be there as part of the team in our breakout groups. It's beautiful every time. We offer this twice a year, and it's rich and rewarding and deep each time. So that's what I did with her. She came and I taught her yoga postures and meditation, and we studied the Raja Yoga text together. At a certain point in her journey, she eventually became a yoga teacher with Ananda. She went through the Ananda yoga teacher training. At a certain point, and I don't remember if this was before or after that, it seemed that discipleship might be the right next step for her. I wasn't sure. So we lived on, James and I, my husband and I lived on the East Coast, and we lived, so we were in New Jersey, and at that time, Ananda had a ashram in Rhode Island, and the ministers there was a very small, beautiful ashram. They would come and visit us, and they would offer an evening kirtan. They'd stay in our home. We had a meditation group, so they'd visit our meditation group, offer a kirtan, and stay the night, and the next morning offer Sunday service in our home. It was really lovely. And so one of the times when they were visiting, I arranged for them to meet with this student, and I was there as well. They thought that would be, she knew me well, and so we sat together and talked, and I was so appreciative of the minister speaking to her and asking different questions. Again, she loved these teachings. She loved all the masters. She had great reverence for them, loved yoga and the meditation practice. And at a certain point, she said something close to, she had a concern because she knew that Jesus was her master, and she understood he was part of this path, but she wanted to make sure that she didn't take a vow that would impact that at all for her. And what the minister said is that it seems that there's a little bit of uncertainty for you about this being the right choice. And she said yes. And he said, then it's a good idea to not take the vow, because when you take it, you want to be beyond uncertainty. And if there's any hesitation, it's better to honor that, to respect that some part of you, not sure this is the right thing, and to relax. And you could just feel like, I looked at her and I just felt like this, he said, you love these teachings, you love yoga and meditation. Why not allow yourself to just fully enjoy them? And maybe discipleship isn't the right choice, but everything else is just fine. And Jesus, as you know, is part of this path, and it seems like no conflict for you there in doing everything. But in terms of discipleship, you can always take it. So at any point, if that uncertainty moves into clarity and confidence, then that would be the time. And if that doesn't happen, it's okay, right? To trust your own inner guidance. And that was really such a beautiful example of how we work with the teachings and the tools and the practices, ministers, that which is in our life offering us help, and at the same time staying deeply connected to your own self. What Swamiji has said and Yogananda says in autobiography, when we're working with divine teachers that are sincere, and certainly working with divine guru grace, we don't lose our own highest truth. In fact, that grows stronger and becomes clearer. So on one hand, I'm offering my life to a guru or a teacher for help and guidance, but their support makes me more of who I am, not less. And that was what I saw in this conversation with the minister and my student, is he was saying, it's your own soul that's guiding you, and you want to trust that. And this is I'll just end with this. It's a beautiful balance of receptivity and autonomy, and how to find our way with that. We want to be open-hearted, receptive, welcoming, and standing within the strength of our own divine self. So that I'll offer for you today, to be attentive to that in your journey this week. How does that work for you? Can you sense where you are in open receptivity and where you are in being able to stay connected to your own highest truth, and how those work together cooperatively? Yogananda, or Swami Kriyananda, called it cooperative obedience, right? So you're in the equation there. Okay, dear soul, so good to be with you today. Wishing you many blessings this week.